using my own mic so that it's recorded. Hold on. Okay. Moving on. This is just the actual volume of the mic in the room. It's not even what's coming through the computer. Do you know how to turn this down a notch for the audience here? I'll speak a little softer as we get started. Thank you for coming tonight to the Atherton Safety Element Community Workshop. This is something that we're putting together. Tonight we'll have an overview of the project, a look at the project schedule, and then I'm going to shift to our first major piece of community outreach, which is an online mapping project that we have and that we're sharing with other jurisdictions in the county. And we'll be looking at how we map vulnerabilities and risk. And then at the end, I'll go over some next steps so you have a sense of what to expect moving forward in this project. So the consultant project team, this is a county-wide effort. So it's led by San Mateo County, and then a few jurisdictions within the county have opted to partner to look at the safety element update collectively rather than doing it on their own. So for example, the city of Menlo Park is doing their own separate safety element update. And in large part, that's because they've also been updating they're going to create an environmental justice element, which is a requirement that they have to do from the state. So the overall consultant is the Community Planning Collaborative. They're working with the jurisdictions, and then they're working with a lot of different subject matter experts like PlaceWorks, Climate Resilient Communities, CRC, Atlas Planning, and Nexus to do some of the more technical review that's required for this. So what is a safety element? The safety element is a mandatory part of the city or jurisdiction's general plan. It identifies hazards of concern and related risks to the community. And then it works with other chapters like the open space element, the housing element, land use element to try and dictate how we address those concerns through the town's general plan. And ultimately, it helps to protect the community against any natural disasters and other hazards. So why do we update the safety element? The big purpose of updating the safety element at this point is so that we can incorporate a few other documents into the safety element and have some sort of collaborative, consolidated resource. Primarily incorporating the 2021 multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plan. That was another huge effort by many jurisdictions in San Mateo County to look at hazards collectively and identify opportunities to address those hazards. That effort doesn't live in our safety element, which means that when we see land use or housing projects come forward, we're not necessarily looking at the implications of the local hazard mitigation plan. We also want to broadly ensure that it's consistent with other general plan elements or other policies adopted by the town. So for example, the town has a climate action plan, and then they have an emergency operations plan that has been most recently used in throughout the pandemic, but it can also be effective during any sort of wildfire or flooding event. So we want to make sure that the updated policies and programs reflected in those are translated into the safety element. The safety element makes the town eligible for certain funding opportunities, especially from state and federal resources. And then updating the element is a requirement by the state to make sure that we're adhering to certain state regulations. So speaking of state law, there are 4 recent state bills that have been passed that require updates to the safety element. The first, SB 1241, Requires updating the flood and wildfire sections, identifying responsible agencies that would respond in that event, and then minimizing risks for new buildings and essential facilities. Looking at where sensitive wildfire areas are, flood-prone areas, and making sure that development is addressing any sort of vulnerabilities. SB 379 for the first time requires a safety element to have a vulnerability assessment prepared. So the vulnerability assessment then identifies assets within a community and more broadly, as well as any sort of particular risks that are associated with that area. From that, it then develops goals, policies, and actions to increase adaptation or resilience. And so what we're looking at tonight will actually help inform the vulnerability assessment that's currently underway. Then we have SB 2140. This is a requirement to incorporate the local hazard mitigation plan directly into the safety element. I kind of went into that a little bit further on the previous slide. And SB 99, which is identifying evacuation constrained residential uses, or sorry, residential areas. In terms of project schedule, this really started in August 2023, later this summer, when the consultant team started reaching out to local jurisdictions, asking for various documents like the local hazard mitigation plan, the town's emergency operations plan, collecting all of that information. They've since put that into a map, which is what I will share with you in the next few slides and then discuss further with you. And that information is really used to then conduct the vulnerability assessment. They're looking at that project or that part of the process going through June this summer. From that, it'll inform the goals, policies, and programs that will feed into the safety element. And drafts of that will be released publicly. It does say that it started in March 2024. We're really just kind of in the midst of kicking off community outreach. So even though it says September 2024, that seems a little ambitious. It's probably going to be more like mid-fall, October, November. And then once we get community feedback on those initial goals and policies, they'll start working on preparing the actual element and chapter itself, which looks more like what you see in the general plan currently. It'll tell Atherton's particular story and provide the narrative that justifies some of those programs and policies. From there, then the environmental review will be conducted, and that is likely going to be an initial study that looks at various required factors of environmental review, from air quality through traffic and as well as wildfire. There's quite a few factors there. All of that will be done simultaneously with analysis, really culminating in May 2025. At which point it will then turn back to the town to consider for adoption, and you'll expect those hearings to move forward really in late spring, early summer next year. So it's quite a long process, not unlike other elements that you might be familiar with in the general plan. And at this point, we're kind of right at the information gathering point at the beginning. So in terms of identifying assets, there are quite a few listed here. I've also included the slide on the table here. Part of what we want to do tonight is make sure that we're not missing anything. So this is pretty robust, and some of these categories are really broad. Parks and recreation areas, private schools, high schools, elementary schools, Samtrans, BART. All of these are things that are captured in the map that you can look at. Just because, for example, airport boundaries aren't necessarily located in, there's no airport in Atherton. In the event of an emergency, we want to make sure that we're considering access to the airport. Any sort of deliveries can make it here if we need it here. Our citizens can get to the airports. That's a little bit of how you might take an asset from outside of the town's geography, think about it countywide, even regionally, and then bring it back into the safety element. The next slide I have here is a list of the potential hazards that are required to be addressed by the safety element, in addition to some that we've already identified as staff. So we have dam failure, drought, erosion, extreme heat, flooding, the presence of hazardous materials, landslides, pests and diseases, sea level rise, seismic hazards, storm surge, and wildfire. And, just to point out, I think pests and diseases are up there because that was a recommendation from the town's arborist. So that's an example of a local staff member providing a contribution this is a list that's being used countywide. So part of that was her consideration of externalities that happen from extreme heat. If you have extremely hot summers, your pests are going to change, your trees are going to be more vulnerable. Okay. So the next slide I have is introducing a mapping project by the county's team. It's pretty broad here. I've created a bit.ly link. For those of you who aren't aware, bit.ly is an opportunity to shrink a very long website into a shorter, more catchy one. So here, all you really have to remember is bit.ly/safety element map. And that'll take you to this screen. And really what you can do is you can look at all of the assets, the hazards, and even some of the social vulnerability metrics, and then map them according to jurisdiction, but then also scale out and see them countywide. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a primer, just to help you understand how to use the map, because not everybody uses GIS every day. So the first thing is that you want to make sure that you're selecting Atherton. If you're really concerned about just what's going on in the town, you don't necessarily want to scale out at this point. I'd recommend just zooming straight into the town boundaries. So there you select Atherton and you can zoom in on town, on the town. The next really important tool to understand is how to expand the menu. And here what I've shown is there's this little caret next to the word assets. And if you click on the caret, it goes from pointing to the right to pointing downwards, and it opens a menu that corresponds to the list of assets on that slide that I showed, and allows you to look at each one of those. So how do you actually now see the information provided in each one? That's by turning on the layer on and off. And here the layer is indicated by an I. Just the clear I means on, and an I with a slash through it means that the layer is off. So what I'll do is I will open up the map on my screen and then turn it back to you to ask for any questions about what assets are identified. We can look together at the map and kind of go through using it collectively to identify the assets, but also looking at the other resources as well, as such as social constructs. So let me get that open and then I will turn it back to you. Okay, so I've opened up the website. You get a summary, kind of a disclaimer provided by the county. I'm just going to blast past that by clicking on this orange bar below. This takes me to the map that I showed you. Here, I'm gonna go over to the left and click on Atherton, which zooms right in. Now I'll go ahead and expand the assets category. And then I'll click on Parks and Recreation. And you can see that actually enhance the visibility, so I don't even have to turn it on and off. But it's really just a matter of clicking on that eye, and then I can also zoom out, and you'll see that there's a variety of other colors representing different types of parks. That information is over here on the right panel that lists urban parks, county parks, state parks, federal parks, and so forth. So then just kind of reiterating some of these assets here, we have the regional bike trail system, airport boundaries, care facilities, emergency healthcare facilities. This is quite important in an emergency. You want to understand what the routes might be to get to the hospital or any other kind of healthcare facilities. There might be also some extra information for each healthcare facility about the services that they provide that may indicate what resources are available in this specific event. Fire stations, police stations, schools, residential structures, gas pipelines, and so forth. And then, of course, we have the hazards list and some areas that identify social vulnerabilities. So. Sure, can you turn the mic on? Can you turn the mic on and speak into the mic so everybody can hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What social vulnerabilities do you mean?
Sure. So here they're looking at any sort of area that might be vulnerable in a federal requirement. So here we have the map where it says very high, relatively high. This might be related to flooding, fire, a collection of hazards.
Natural hazards, though,
Yes.
not social. That's what I was asking about, the social hazard business.
Oh, this would be a natural hazard.
Can we talk about social before we're finished?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm noticing where there's two major highways not noted as assets, and granted, they could become compromised in a natural disaster, but do they not constitute assets being proximal to two major highways?
They should be included on here. Let's see how they would be noted. It might, let's see, no. Yeah, so in this sense, they're just really identified as a given, as a community thoroughfare. So the assets are really going beyond that in terms of looking at alternative transportation networks. So I have BART and Caltrain, Samtrans, and then also the airport and bike trails.
So this could be blown up to show Atherton and street signs of Atherton if we wanted to, just expands.
Yes. So here I've shown you how to zoom into Atherton by clicking this. You can zoom out to the county by clicking that. This map is really only designed to serve the county and the local jurisdictions, so it doesn't go beyond the county. But you can also toggle to other partner jurisdictions that are looking at this. For example, there's not an option to look at Menlo Park because they're not part of this effort. They have their own program that they're working with. But the member jurisdictions, Belmont, Brisbane, Burlingame, East Palo Alto, you're going to be able to look and zoom into all of those.
The other thing I will raise, I don't know whether it's appropriate for this, but Atherton did implement a series of emergency assembly points, 22 locations throughout the community. And they are theoretically intended to be assets in times of trouble.
That's a great addition. Thank you. We can make sure that's added.
When you talked about hazards, I understand there are natural hazards of all kinds. You have lots of them listed, but the social hazard that I've been concerned about ever since we moved here in 1980 is that I think we were prey to crime. And I really feel like we are prey because other communities will prey upon us and have. I've had 2 bicycles stolen, one from within my garage and one from in front of my garage in the last 3 years. And now I have gates all over my property, but that's because we couldn't keep people from coming in. And at the time, when I reported this, the policeman said, well, there are so many bicycles stolen, they're just like cash. We can't keep track of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would be really interesting to see a map that shows vehicle theft, start with automobiles, that shows the county and then shows Atherton. And what streets in Atherton are prone to having vehicle theft. And if you threw bikes in there, you get closer to the petty cash that people really want to live on. And I think we are prey to people who steal those here more than other places. Had a bike stolen in Los Altos once, but that's my backyard. That's why I spent thousands of dollars to defend my little piece of property, so I'm not prey as much as everybody else. And I think it'd be really interesting if we had a dialogue about home security as part of this, because the biggest hazard I think we face, which is more common than flooding, is home theft. We lived a block from Chuck Schwab, and they had somebody steal thousands of dollars of wine from their house, a block from my house. And all I know is that he was more prey than I, but he was right there and I was nearby. So I know we have these records. I would love to see it if we considered it a human sociological hazard to work against crime. It's not the police's job, it's all of us perhaps. But if we were aware, and maybe we should all be a little scared, but I don't like having shotgun shells near my shotgun just because somebody might break into my house.
Mm-hmm.
But I know where they are because somebody might break into my house. I don't want to worry about that. But we've had moments when that was a concern in the last 2 years here. So my thought would be if you extended this to sociological hazards, you could talk about crime in our neighborhoods, so we're aware, so it's not just in the back of the police blotter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to know, I think frankly that living 2 blocks from here is not a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be of interest if we were working together to diminish crime so we're less susceptible ourselves.
Sure. This isn't, I mean, the effort here is, you're right, more natural hazard related, but the Atherton safety element doesn't necessarily have to be explicit to that. And it does not have to limit itself to whatever outcomes are recommended by this project.
If we were to expand the idea of loss to include loss to crime, and you said, what were the losses to tree falls in Atherton the last year? I don't know, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we've got a number for that probably. I'll bet we don't have a report of what's the value of automobiles stolen in Atherton expanded, if you like, to San Mateo,
Mm-hmm.
or if you wanted to go more personal, bicycles.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really think that there's a network of people who live on us. It's like we have parasites.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'd love to have a talk about how we minimize our vulnerabilities there. And that's just a suggestion that put a hazard in for home security and safety. And let's look at it.
Lot of thefts going on. And yes, we need to be scared, even after having a gate, security, everything, but still, we don't feel 100% safe, kind of comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they came into my garage the second time to steal a bicycle, all they had to do was open another door and they were in my bedroom.
Mhm.
And that's why I would be tempted to have a gun handy. And I don't think we want everybody with a gun with a bullet in it, but we shouldn't have to get there. We should be addressing, thinking about how we could work together to be less vulnerable.
Sure. So I am relatively new and actually, sorry, I should have introduced myself. I get sometimes so focused on the content. I'm Brittany Bendix, I'm the town planner. But I'm relatively new as town planner, not new to Atherton because I did grow up nearby. And I certainly can work with the chief to understand kind of what, reports and community groups are available. But if there are things that the individuals here have participated in or aware of that you want to raise to my awareness now, great, please.
If that map showed home break-ins in the last year, 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
by address with little dots, then we'd be aware, gee, where are they breaking in? Or
Mhm.
as important, perhaps stolen vehicles. Maybe they're all stolen from supermarkets. I don't know. But to raise our awareness of what we can do, and then we can start talking about it. And I'd rather not have the police say, when your bike's stolen, we have no chance of seeing it again because it's probably going to be sold on eBay within 2 weeks in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
But that's happening here. That's from the police department to me, and I was surprised. Okay.
Thank you.
Sociological hazards.
Next door, perhaps I read about and they had a video of this guy taking the bike, and it was a particular, he had a very expensive, there was some equipment on the seat, and it was a unique one, so he would find it. And he saw the bike, and I think there was somewhere in Redwood City, there's a homeless, or whatever, that encampment, okay, that he went there. Because it led him to that. But when he started asking, in this video, they showed this, that he asked somebody and he said, well, if I give you the name just of the person here, what will you give me some money? And then in the meantime, this next door app, it just tells that 3 or 4 people came out of the encampments with golf clubs, and he goes, I had to run away. That's how it's good. Yeah.
They make all kinds of devices. Not my issue. I think the issue is that we are vulnerable in this community. Police know it. Most of us only wear the head off. But I know it's happening all around us. Happening in Washington.
On the subject of vulnerabilities, I'd like to point out that we've had some new buildings put in, senior care facilities. And I think we should pay some special attention because there's no way that the staff could handle those people in the facility. So, you know, Kensington has been built. There's some other facilities here. Perhaps, I'm not aware, but perhaps there are some daycare facilities, and those are separate from schools and healthcare facilities because Kensington would be a residential facility that I think would need special attention.
That's a great point. Thank you. And it's also kind of made me think about, in terms of evacuation, other areas that might be vulnerable. Sometimes we see in disasters, livestock or pets or any sort of kind of congregation of animals. So just trying to think through, are there any other kind of things out there, people that we would want to make sure? She was mentioning that there are some new senior facilities in town and that the staff assigned, or even to some of, I think, daycares and nurseries might not be large enough to handle an evacuation for an immediate evacuation. And have we thought through any sort of needed assistance that would be required there.
I was just thinking Kensington House is, a memory care facility, so the residents there probably would not be would need a great deal of assistance and direction.
This has come up in some of the senior discussions, that there are a significant number of seniors, and we don't know who they are, but there's a significant number of seniors in the town who are on some sort of medical support, electrical support. So therefore, in an emergency, in a disaster of some kind, if they lose that power, it would be nice to know who they were, so we could find a way to protect them or help them in some fashion. We don't know who they are. And I don't know, I mean, to some extent, it might be intrusive in their personal life to find it out, but maybe some people would be willing to let that people know that's true. So there are a series of vulnerable people in the town, whether it's age or disability, that in a disaster will need help. And the police probably know a few of them, but not all of them. And so to the extent we can determine that, it'd be useful, but maybe it's not possible.
Yeah, that points out a hazard, loss of power that you don't have under the hazards.
Do you have figures of the probabilities or the frequency in the last 200 years of life-threatening hazards in these areas you're talking about? For example, sea level rise, my guess is about de minimis. And rather than worrying a lot of time about it, I suspect the likelihood the sea is going to come back is low. But you do have earthquakes, you do have wildfires, you do have other things which have higher probability. And I would hope that we're able to focus our attention on the ones that have high probabilities. But an earthquake or something like a fire that would cause evacuations, they make a lot of sense, and focus the efforts, what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we're having our own specific outreach meeting, is because some of these aren't really identified as hazards that are a major threat to Atherton. For example, the sea level rise studies, they're not going to encroach far enough that it would become problematic. But we do have to constantly keep in mind the evacuation routes. Additionally, looking at it from a collaborative approach is helpful, because there might be situations where Atherton needs to help with evacuees. I've worked in jurisdictions where the fire was in 2 towns over, but we as the town were absorbing a predominant number of evacuees because there was really nowhere to go, and the proximity, like the potential damage from the fire was so broad. But yes, we are, this is really an opportunity for us to kind of narrow in on specific hazards to Atherton, and that's why we're here. Well, the interesting thing, that the power hazard raises is that it's probably looked at in extreme heat, because we have the rolling blackouts to address that. And then we have flooding and storm problems that would touch the power issue. But there was a time when we had to deal with rolling brownouts, because the state couldn't handle the grid couldn't handle the power, right? So it is a really interesting concept to pull it out as its own topic, rather than having it embedded as a like side effect or a symptom of the real hazard, the broader hazard. So I'll be interested to hear what the consultants working on this have to say about that.
Seems to me the bulk of our power outages happen because we have all of our power lines suspended in the air and below aging canopies, which themselves become hazards in high winds and whatnot. So I think that's really the hazard.
I would also like to bring up the fact that we have vulnerability in communication. So if we lose our cell phone towers, and right now we're in the midst of, although it looks like it won't happen, but we did have a big conversation about the loss of landlines. And I know that at the Love the Earth Festival, it was brought up that a lot of all your gates are on power. And do you know how to open them if you don't have power? Otherwise, you'll be caged in. And sometimes they work on communication. You know, your cell phone, your landline might be the operative, the security operative for that. And in the type of community that we have here, a lot of you do have security systems. And so I don't want anybody to be locked in.
Bernie, got a question for you. Following up on Lee's comments on the potential hazards. Is the final deliverable or some deliverable a rating of which is the greatest hazard and which isn't, or how do you address them all? What do you do?
No, there's no prioritization or rating. I mean, there could be in the terms of, so at this point, right, we're just information gathering. Eventually what we're gonna do is we're going to have to identify the goals, the programs and the policies that the town wants to adopt as part of its housing element. At some level, there's gonna have to be prioritization of those goals based on what the town wants to put its resources towards. And, you know, that could be staffing, that could be budget. So at this point, there's really no prioritization, but that's actually gonna be really important, I think, in the future public comment as we start
But
looking at
who
the
does that?
goals.
Who does the prioritization?
Well, it would be I mean, it would be the town council, the city council, as they move forward with adopting the safety element and then adopting budget.
But could we cut to the chase here and take the potential hazards and rank them first before having the town do that? Because you can waste a lot of time. So that's one question. My other question is, truthfully, the town's done a lot of work in this area, right? And one of them is a group called ADAPT, ADAPT. How do you interface with them and pick up all the information they already have and all the rest? How's that work?
So I'm actually working to try and either involve them in their own discussion on this topic. Very similar to this.
Okay.
Meeting.
The last time we went through this, updated the safety element was when? You know,
Oh, I'd have to.
I know
look
you
at
weren't
that.
involved in it, but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any examples of tangible programs that emerged from the last safety program, because I think we're all kind of curious what kinds of things can we expect might come of these programs and policies, and maybe drawing from historical record would be, and if you don't have access to it,
Sure.
it's no big deal.
Well,
but
I can
just a
pull it
thought.
up. So let me take a look
Sure.
really quickly while we continue with the discussion. I stopped sharing my screen, which was just the map. We weren't using the map, so, and I think I've given enough instructions on how to go play with it at home.
But I suggest that in thinking about this thing, instead of saying the state's doing it, so we're gonna do it, I'm not sure where it originated. If we're able to talk about, let's say San Mateo County and I roll in it, which is a piece of it. San Mateo may have programs we don't need to duplicate, but we can work with them, obviously. And then if you get back and say, what has been the cost, or what is a forecast, if somebody wants to try that, of cost for the last 50 years in any one of these things for our community? Now, the community has grown, it's gonna grow, so maybe you want to forecast, you do both perhaps. But if you had an issue of cost, and then you could deal with personal risk, paralleling that, but 2/3 of these aren't even gonna be there. But my point is, if you then looked at some of these other costs, issues that we're talking about, but call it home safety and security. The cost that we've incurred in the last 50 years in that alone is probably bigger than any of else that you've mentioned. But we don't know those numbers, and it would be helpful to put them on the same piece of paper so we can focus our conversation where we think there's really a threat.
So we can certainly we can look into whether or not there's space to do this as part of, or space to do that, a fiscal analysis really, within the realm of the safety element update project now. But if there isn't, it can certainly be added as a program to do that in the future and to require that moving forward.
Talk about hazards. Don't focus on physical hazards only. That's a mistake. That's a waste of energy. No need to waste energy going forward. Focus on where the costs are or are forecast to be, and you can should include personal hazards risk. But I'm concerned about hiring consultants to do things that are of low value when we can focus our energies, and how to prioritize is the best way to focus. Decide that first, not after you submit studies.
Okay.
The follow-up again on Lee said, my other thought is you look at this and you go, you know, there are insurance risk managers that do this for a living. That have, they have incredible data on all this stuff. And to have them sit down with the town of Atherton and look at Atherton and say, "Gee, forget about these, they're not a problem whatsoever, but concentrate on these would be a nice place." I mean, there are subject experts that we could go get to help us cut through the chase and go on to look at the items we really care about. I mean, I don't see dune and bluff erosion to be something I'm too worried about in Atherton. So there are things we can concentrate on. And again, we're all kind of novices on this. There are people who make a living on risk and putting money and put money on it, percentage on it. They can help us with this. Now, maybe you guys have some of them at the M Group, I don't know. But there are insurance companies that look at this and be able to make a decision pretty quickly.
Well, so I will say the motivating factor at this point is to adhere to state requirements. And you had asked about the last time the safety element was updated. That was actually in January 2020. So it hasn't been that long ago. I have it pulled up here, and if you're ready for it, we can kind of skim through it so you can get a sense of what's already included in it.
So what does the state require? You said it's requirement. What is the requirement?
So the question is, what is the state required? And that goes through the 4 state bills that I mentioned earlier. One of them was that we include this vulnerability assessment. This is the first time we've ever been asked to do that. It's been outlined as a state law, and so we would be adhering to at least the metrics required by the state law. We were requested to update the flood and wildfire sections, incorporate the local hazard mitigation plan, which frankly is where a lot of this information already lives, but it doesn't tie into the safety element. So that's a really important thing to do. And then also identify evacuation constrained residential areas. And that's really to get at, in the event of wildfire or flooding hazards, how are people escaping? Because there have been problems with that, with people being able to have a secondary means of egress from their property.
So lead me through that. So we come up with some plan for exiting if there's an emergency, right? Does that turn out to be painted highways, ribbons on the street? I mean, how do I know in my house, if there's an emergency, where do I go and how do I get there? How do I know that? What's the deliverable?
There would be emergency evacuation routes that are identified. So, some of this is actually already in the safety element. So bringing this up, it identifies a number of seismic hazards, flooding, wildland fires, and then also has a reference to the emergency operations plan, climate change, as well as evacuation routes with peak load water supply requirements. And then it has a list of goals and objectives. So it's kind of
Back to the
skimming
action plan again.
through the narrative of that. I just want to get to an example goal, program, and an objective so you can kind of see what that looks like as the end product for this. So here we have goal CS to reduce the risk of injury, structure, and property damage from exposure to seismic activity. So policy CS 2.1 is supporting the goals, objective policies in the Atherton local hazard mitigation plans and operation plans. That's the connection back to the other document. Provide goal or policy 2, public education, research, and information dissemination on seismic hazards and emergency response should be encouraged. So shall be encouraged is not as clear as must be encouraged and how that encouragement's gonna go. And then this is the emergency evacuation routes map that I think you were kind of getting organized.
So let's go to that. So we got 2,500 homes in Atherton, right? So each address you could drill down to and it would say in a fire, here's the evacuation you take.
Yes.
So, and how will we do that? How will we promulgate that to people so they know? Is it going to be a map, a postcard? I mean, a GPS? How's it work?
I mean, that's good information for you to give us, in terms of recommendations on the most effective ways to get that information out there. It could be by regular workshops. It could be through the Athertonian. It could be through email blasts. Like, what are the effective ways?
None of those are going to work.
Okay.
I mean, so, something happens and you say, there's an alarm, I've got to get out. How do I know where my route out is the question I'm going to ask. Am I going to go to the web and look at that? No, I'm not going to do that. Am I going to do that? Not going to find an old Athertonian. No. I don't know that answer. Then that's what hopefully you guys will come up with, is something that's actually actionable,
Mhm.
where if something happens, I can, oh shit, I got to go. Where do I go? Right? I mean, that's because having it printed doesn't matter if I don't
Mhm.
know. Am I missing something here? Am I?
Well, there is an emergency network that if it's a nuclear blast, you're working.
That one,
you could
I don't
probably-
care about that one.
But you could drill that down. My point is that's already been tested. It works.
I mean,
They
we are,
wanted to do something.
we are getting to a level of detail that is almost identical to what would be outlined in the emergency operations plan. Where if there is X emergency, these are the people in town that are responsible to getting out there and directing traffic flow so that residents
Makes
know.
sense.
Right,
So that already exists.
yes. So this is just a process to
Oh, I missed it in
update.
2020. I don't know.
Oh.
I
Well,
must have been sleeping.
Frankly, in the event of an emergency, there should be people out there that are helping direct and guide you to the appropriate place to go. So that you don't have to make that decision, because at that point it needs to be intuitive. You need to be going the opposite route from danger.
That's exactly what I was going to point out. You can't have a definitive evacuation route because it depends upon where the danger is.
And I mean, that's gonna be our police, our police officers, our fire department. Those are really the first responders in that term, in terms of making sure that the flow is to evacuate.
And we trust and count on them every day. And if something really big happens, they're there. But they're not telling us much. They're there and they will say, we'll tell you when you can leave your home or whatever. So anticipating is a good thing. If there's a way to anticipate, so we don't have to call and get the busy signal because they're all at the hazard, whatever.
Mhm.
That's a thought process. If there's a way to communicate more detail, we could evolve that one.
But tell me if I'm wrong, chief. I've been told I'm the first responder at my house by definition. And that if there's a real emergency, don't expect to see our policemen there for 2 days. I mean, they got families, they got places to go to. They're not going to be at my house when all of us, when 2,500 people ask for help. It's not going to happen.
There are different types of disasters, right? In the event that there is a wildfire threat, there is going,
Earthquake instead.
sure, earthquake. So then, yeah, there needs to be some training for residents on how to deal with the earthquake that happens at their home and what to do, and congregation points. I mean, these are things that we drill on in school.
The earthquake drills? Yeah.
Yeah, we do. I think, well, I do know a little bit about the plan, but I think this conversation is a bit. The plan is overarching, and the things that you were talking about, the emergency response, we have those in place through Zone Haven to advise people of what routes, because we can't tell, somebody made a point over here, I don't know what route to tell you until I know what the situation is. and through SMC alerts. And so there is, I'll just say, there is a big responsibility on our residents to sign up for this information, to be prepared for this information, like adapt. But I think, you know, the conversation is great, but I think the intent of the plan is we're way down here and the plan is.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I want to get out of it is if we're not doing enough outreach, then we need to hear about it. Or if we're not outreaching the right way and you have some suggestions on how we can improve, that's going to come up when we get to the goals, objectives, policies, programs section of this effort. And then you get into prioritization of, okay, is it more important to deal with addressing power outages, vulnerabilities, or making sure that everybody has that extra email blast of earthquake safety, right? And that's kind of the operational, the budgetary prioritization that I was trying to get at. It's going to happen naturally after this document is created,
And I think
not before.
And I think a big part too is just education about the plan. And then it's important to know too, that we utilize this plan to take a look at our response plans too. Are we hitting what the plan says we should be doing? So it's a guiding document for us as well, down into more of the details.
What I'm hoping is that there's communication back too, that we're not here just to absorb and go back home and tell everybody it's all taken care of, don't worry about it. That you have an opportunity to write a note that will actually get back, so the next time you're here, you'll reiterate some of the things we're telling you today.
Sure. Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to do a shout out to the town arborist because, hey, during that kind of initial data collection from just staff members, I was able to get a comment from an Atherton team member and have it embedded for the entire county's communication outreach or like outreach kickoff. And I think that's really important and it shows that the team is listening to the feedback it's getting.
There's obviously a big partnership here, and Brittany and I've had minimal discussions, but we haven't had a chance to sit down, as you mentioned earlier, to have the discussions after the outreach, for me to educate you and vice versa.
Yeah.
I like that you've invited us to be here to hear and to say something.
And it, you know,
Hopefully, we'll continue as part of the dialogue going forward. If there's more than one opportunity for interaction, that's a good thing.
it doesn't end just tonight. There will be more touch points with community efforts and outreach. And if you think of something beyond tonight on this topic, you can certainly email me.
Just a point of information, Zone Haven is now Genesis and it's an app you get on your phone. So if you would like to know that, just download the app Genesis.
So I'm gonna switch to wrapping things up unless there are any other comments. All right. So next steps. What you can expect is that I'm going to take this information, I'm going to provide it back to the team. They're working on the preparation of the climate vulnerability assessment. They're going to prepare draft goals, policies, and programs. And then, as I mentioned already, we'd be returning back to the community for feedback. I did mention that if you think of something else, you want to get in contact with me. This is going to go on until summer 2025. Feel free to reach out at any point, until it's really at the council's second meeting for adoption. It's not too late. My address is up, my email address is up here as well as my telephone number. And otherwise, thank you all for being here. It's been a really helpful discussion for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the big print.
Yep.
You don't mind? Yeah, I gotta go to my office. Is it cash?
It's a request for
Just real.
You all think that
alligator.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure Ray's.
Yeah.
one. For the purpose of
Well,
being converted.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still working on the date for.
Funny,
we
it's
talked
like